We are down to 4 major football games until August. College football done after tonight. It's Notre Dame and Ohio State. It's Evan Bland of the World-Herald. Good morning.
Morning, guys.
Tonight's game in Atlanta. What's the impact from Nebraska's perspective if Ohio State and the Big Ten win a national title? Anything?
I can't think of anything obvious. I mean, if they're carrying the flag for the Big Ten, I suppose that's always a good thing. It's another sign that the Big Ten has the resources, the exposure, the TV deals, and it wouldn't hurt to keep the national championship in the league. So I think you probably start there. I don't know how much of a shock it would be necessarily that Ohio State wins the championship. Broadly speaking, I know they're a favorite in this game, probably a big favorite, but they have a $20 million roster. That's kind of out there. They have most of the best players, it seems like, in this game. So I guess what it says is Nebraska had a lead in the fourth quarter against the national champions in Columbus. That's pretty cool, and something I think that we've kind of talked about, or I've talked about with my colleagues, has been sometimes the difference when you have as much talent as Ohio State does. It doesn't always show up as much in these big games as it does throughout the course of the regular season when you maybe aren't at your sharpest mentally, or you're not in the best possible headspace, but you still have the best guys. And sometimes that's what puts you over the top. And it felt kind of thinking back to that game, that's kind of what it was, where Nebraska, played pretty well. Ohio State was going through some things at that time, but they still had some of the best wide receivers in college football, and that made the difference in the outcome of that game. So, I guess it would say that if you're Nebraska and you're evaluating your season, like, that's the margin from making a CFP run and being in the title to finishing, just above 500 in Yankee Stadium. I mean, sometimes it can come down to a drive or two, and I mean, how thin is that gap that everyone's trying to traverse at this point in college football?
Evan, I'm going to give you a sentence. I want you to finish it. The first 12-team college football playoff was blank.
Eventually exciting. I think the first round was largely a dud, but I thought the semifinals were compelling. I think this championship game has a chance to be compelling. The conversation kind of felt like has quieted about reseeding the structure of the format. And I think that's the right move. We saw it play out 1 year, like, let this thing go a little bit longer before you make kind of these sweeping changes to the thing. But yeah, I thought the first few games, first round, wasn't all that exciting. They went up against the NFL, on the first playoff weekend for the NFL. Then that didn't go great for the CFP, but I just thought it got a lot more exciting toward the end. You saw brand names, you saw good teams rise to the top. I mean, this particular matchup with Notre Dame and Ohio State, I mean, these teams wouldn't, based on the regular seasons they had, would not have sniffed a 4-team playoff under the previous format. So, like, I think it's fun that this format allows for teams to stub their toe a little bit, but still go on heaters and eventually finish at the top of the heap. So, yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. More football is always better than less football, and there's probably going to be some tweaks that you have to figure out down the line. But I think it's been largely very entertaining, and anything that can happen to take the focus off, even briefly, the off-the-field stuff in college athletics with all the changing legislation, that's a win, and I think this format and this tournament's provided that.
Let's go with the on the field, because On3 just released their way too early college football top 25. Nebraska is 25th.
Ooh.
Texas 1, Ohio State 2, Oregon 3, Penn State is 4, Notre Dame is 5th. So let's bring it to what will take the field in 25. But news yesterday, and you got to realize the timing. I mean, we're all watching Nebraska basketball, trying to make a rally against Maryland, and all of a sudden it drops that a offensive lineman is going to Kentucky. More of a surprise to you that he chose Kentucky over Michigan, or Kentucky over what I think was a very aggressive offer by Nebraska?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know kind of the financial aspect of it, I guess it sounds like it was fairly even for those offers throughout. I don't know. Like sometimes there are personal connections. I don't know that there was one with Shiaz Pete in this particular case. Maybe maybe it's a case of Kentucky wanting a little revenge for losing out on Dane Key and Hardly Gilmore and its position coach, and they got Dante Dowdell. So it is kind of interesting that there's been like this little portal recruiting rivalry that's heated up between Nebraska and Kentucky. But I don't know. Like I looked into Shiaz Pete a little bit, and his story is really interesting. As a guy who was a total non-prospect and is of Native American origin, and just his ascent is really fascinating. So I don't know why it would be Kentucky, other than it's the SEC. It's life changing money, that sort of thing. And that was sort of Nebraska's last major portal target that they were looking at. And so now they can reset and look forward to that spring window in April and see how that shakes out after spring ball and all the rest. But I think that was just kind of that moment was when Nebraska clearly wants another tackle. Pete would have fit that bill. It sounds like they bid accordingly and have been bid aggressively for his services, and he ultimately chose to go somewhere else. So I think you put a pin in that thing and you say, how does that position develop in spring? Who becomes available on the market in April and potentially into the summer? And you got to imagine that's an area that Nebraska's not finished looking at just yet.
Evan, looking at this way too early, college football top 25. Now, granted, there are going to be some spring transfers, and you never know about injuries. But for the most part, Nebraska, if they don't start the year ranked, they're going to be pretty damn close to doing that. If you're looking at their schedule for the 2025 season, only 2 teams are going to be ranked to begin the year. That's Penn State and Michigan. Is it unfair to say that anything less than 9 wins in 2025 is a disappointment for this team?
Well, I mean, yeah, probably,
okay.
But that's been that way for the last 8 to 10 years.
Yeah,
I mean, it's been annual disappointment. What's interesting to me about that ranking is it brings back shades of 2019.
Yeah,
where it's a very similar situation where 2018 Nebraska got a freshman quarterback, Adrian Martinez, who finished strong, who was a dark horse Heisman candidate, and the rest of the team was okay, and they got a little bit better in some spots. But I think there was a sense at that time that maybe Nebraska doesn't deserve to be in the top 25 just yet. That was one of those rare years where I think the local outlook was less optimistic than the national outlook, and so people were excited about that team. And I think you have a little bit of that here, where it's the same deal, where you have a talented freshman quarterback who got better as the year went on, and it's what I think is interesting in this portal era is. It used to be you could kind of tell the teams that were on the rise because this core group of players was getting older and maybe they had some success and they were getting ready to take the next step. And I think what that's become now is, since you don't have that broadly across the team because of the portal, it's become that with quarterbacks. So, which quarterback had a good year is coming back, has a chance to be better. And I think Nebraska clearly fits that description. And so in the absence of certainty or more evidence with a lot of these teams who are going to be starting transfers and new signal callers and all the rest, like Nebraska is an option for that. So, yeah, I could see why nationally you look at that and say top 25. But obviously you can make a case why they shouldn't be there pretty easily too. New coordinators across the board and a reshuffled offensive line, like we just talked about. That's not an area that they're settled on. The defense is going to look a lot different. So interesting that they are drawing national attention and optimism in that way. But I think that's what it comes down to. Is this is a story about the quarterback, and do you believe that he can take that step? And there are the skill guys and the protection around him where Nebraska can take that next step too.
Yeah, looking at these 25, it's also interesting because half of them, maybe even a little bit more than half, will have new quarterbacks.
Yeah, good point.
5 of the top 10, Nebraska, of course, will have a returning quarterback. Let me shift to a couple of different position groups, because as now we're done with this kind of portal time. I mean, guys could leave because school starts back up on Tuesday. Some guys may not come back that were maybe walk on, so you start whittling down the roster, which is at 130 now, which Sam documented today. I'm going to give you the option in the spring, and you're going to be the only journalist because we like Evan.
Yes.
You're going to get to go to every practice, but you have to pick one position group that you're going to hang out with the entire practice. Ooh. Are you more interested in watching the wide receivers or the defensive backs this spring?
Wide receivers, I think. I mean, defensive back, there's so many guys in that room. That's the obvious spot that you look at and say there's going to be a number of trimmings that come from there, especially when you get back Deshaun Singleton in that mix. That's just a spot where they took a lot of young guys, and they still have a lot of returners there and all the rest. But, yeah, I think I would start in the receiver group. I want to watch and see what Ja'Cory Barney looks like with another year of strength training and some experience under his belt. I want to see how Dane Key becomes a leader and puts himself in that mix as maybe Nebraska's next transfer receiver leader, like they've had now for 4 years running. I want to see Hardley Gilmore and what his potential could be, and Isaiah Hunter, who's on campus and has been a playmaker at Cal, and just kind of down the line. Like, I think that's a fascinating group. I want to see Tequil Shorts in his element and how he coaches as a former player and somebody who's, I think pretty articulate. How does that compare to what Nebraska has done at that position previously? I just think that's a spot where there's production that they've added. There's potential that they've added. You've got all kind of different body shapes. You got some taller guys with a good catch radius. You have a few burners. How does that all come together? Because, I mean, outside of Barney, we really don't know necessarily what that's going to look like. So I think that'll be a really interesting spot as they kind of figure out roles, what guys are good at, start to establish some kind of a pecking order. Whereas I think in the secondary, you have a pretty good sense, okay, it's going to be Sear Wright on one side. You're probably going to have Singleton back there. You're probably going to have Marquise Buford back there. But what does that second corner spot look like? Is that the Idaho transfer? Is that, what about Donovan Jones? How does he emerge after the Pinstripe Bowl? So there are certainly, I think, interesting storylines there too, but just give me that wide receiver group based on that interesting mix of production and potential.
Evan, we'll go back to this kind of comparing rooms game because I really do like it. You have two rooms on the offensive end where there's some production there, but then there's also optimism in terms of younger guys and their ability to perform. You have the running back room where you have Emmett Johnson. You've seen what he's done under Dana Holgorsen, and then you got Quinn Ives and Parker and Booth, and you're kind of wondering who's going to emerge as that second guy under Johnson within that group, and even if Johnson is number one. And then you got the tight end room where you have Luke Lindenmeyer, but then after that, you're wondering, well, okay, Heinrich Harburg makes the transition. Carter Nelson, is he ready to take that next step after playing his freshman year? What room would you, at this point, be more confident in? Would you be more confident in the tight end room to perform or the running back room to perform?
I think I would say that the tight end room, and some of that's history in the last, again, 8 to 10 years. And I mean, Nebraska running backs have just not consistently shown they can do it. Some of that's maybe a reflection of what the offensive line could look like. But I think the tight end room is really fascinating. We saw Luke Lindenmeyer in the pinstripe, and kind of maybe this idea that he's been one of Nebraska's better tight ends, and we just haven't known it over the last year or so. Harburg, he's transitioning, but I mean, we know the physical measurables are there. He's one of the fastest, most explosive physical guys on the team. That's been the case for years. We saw a little bit of that in New York as well. It sounds like Carter Nelson maybe is making that transition this year, and there's a reason why he had, almost 50 FBS offers coming out of high school in Ainsworth, Nebraska, like just an explosive athlete. We saw just a tiny flash of that. What can that look like under Dana Holgorsen? So I think that's a really interesting room, and Nebraska thinks it's going to be a good room because they didn't have any tight end visitors in from the portal. So I think that's the other interesting part, is you can really tell what a team thinks based on the guys they bring in. So I think they feel good about that room. Interestingly, they also didn't bring in a running back among those portal visitors. So they do feel good about that room. You retain Emmett Johnson. That seems like the guy who can catch the ball, who's maybe the most versatile offensive weapon. What I'll be curious about is if they feel like a short yardage back emerges, the Dante Dowdell role from last year. I don't know that it's obvious that guy's on the roster. Maybe he is, but Ives has been somebody that the staff has talked about for a long time. Does he take that next step?
Mm-hmm.
I think Jamarian Parker, to me, like he's on the short list of freshmen that are coming in that could make a quick impact. It's a position that's the case. He was under recruited because he didn't play as a sophomore in high school because of a tragedy with his friend.
Yeah.
So like there's just all kinds of, I think, intrigue there. But just based on sort of the potential of things, I think tight end has a chance to be just as good as it's been, even with some names who are maybe not quite as household among Nebraska fans.
I agree. Evan, as always, we appreciate it. Have a good week, maybe a quiet week as well.
Sounds great. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Evan.
Evan Bland of the Omaha World-Herald.